Yes.
As I mentioned before the lunch break, the next topic to explore is the development of a public education campaign around the risks of AIDS. And the first document I'd like to go to is at DHSC 0002114. This is the front page of a strategic paper circulated by Sir Donald Aitchison entitled HTLV-3 Infection, the AIDS Epidemic and the Control of its Spread in the UK. It was sent to the Secretary of State, Norman Fowler, for his urgent attention, and it was copied to other DHSS ministers. Could we go to the next page? We can just see the beginning of the paper. And then within that paper, could we go to page 12, please, and have a look at paragraph 1 of the summary. Sorry, look at the first paragraph on the page under control of spread of infection. And we can see that Sir Donald Aitchison was warning or flagging that in the absence of effective immunisation of susceptibles, I'm not sure if that's a reference to the possibility that some people could be immunologically more vulnerable. He says control of the epidemic must depend on reducing the frequency of transmission of infection. This will require the urgent development of a properly surveyed and evaluated programme of health education and counselling with the assistance of experts and the active cooperation of the groups at risk.
I think the answer to your question about immunological more vulnerable must not be the case, because there was no immunisation. And I think, therefore, susceptibles mean those people who are most at risk of contracting it because they're most exposed to the likely transmission.
So high-risk groups.
Yes.
It makes sense there. Thank you. Yes, that makes more sense. Lord Fowler's evidence about this document was that it was around this time that the CMO sought an urgent meeting with him to prioritise the response to the AIDS crisis. And Lord Fowler told the inquiry that it was the coming together, I think, of Donald and myself that really changed the things. So this is the beginning of a collaboration between them in relation to, particularly to public education. I'll just pick that up by going back into Sir Donald Aitchison's autobiography, please, which is at WITN 0771088 and at page 15 of the document. And if we look at the final paragraph on the right-hand side, beginning in 1985, he said that it became clear that their current approach in the department to deal with each of the crises as they arose was no longer tenable. What was needed to take the bull was to take the bull by the horns and, with the help of expert advice, make available to everyone in the country a frank and full explanation of the facts, how HIV is and is not spread. He says he was able to advise the public that HIV does not pass from a close contact as occurs in the tube in rush hour or in the cinema, nor in food or water, but that it did spread or could spread during sexual intercourse with an infected person without a condom or by infected blood during a transfusion. And he notes that although that would inevitably involve distributing explicit information about sex, which some people might find offensive, that could not be helped. He says when he put the proposal to Norman Fowler, whatever concerns he may have had privately about the effect of approving such a campaign might have on his future political career, he set those aside and subject to one condition. I don't propose to go into it, but it was that he had consent from major religious figures, so he had to go and talk to the Archbishop of Canterbury, I think, about it. He gave the Don't Die of Ignorance campaign his enthusiastic support. And then if we could go, please, to page 16 and look at the middle paragraph on the right-hand side of the page, beginning, fortunately, for the United Kingdom. You'll see there that Sir Donald Aitchison described facing disapproval from the Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, regarding the sexually explicit public health education that he proposed. So that's what I was referring to earlier in relation to the concern that making the specifics public, as was necessary so that people understood what the risks were, was politically unattractive. But he had the support of the Deputy Prime Minister, William Whitelaw, and he was able to obtain approval for a universal leaflet drop, for free time on radio and TV, and for a set of newspaper and magazine advertisements. And we can pick that up in terms of what that campaign looked like in the 1985 annual report, which is at DHSC 0007007. So we can see that this is on the state of the public health for the year 1985. This report was published in 1986, and Sir Donald Aitchison's introduction is dated July 1986. So the same caveats apply about when exactly it was drafted. We're not sure. Could we go to page 45, please? Could we try page 53? I think I've given you the internal page number rather than the electronic page number. Yes, my maths worked. So if we look at the bottom of that page, there's a section on health education. And we can see that planning commenced in 1985 for a major national campaign of public information to begin in the spring of 1986. An interdepartmental group was formed and an AIDS and education subgroup set up jointly with the Department of Education and Science. The aim of the campaign, and this is being set out in a public document in itself, was to provide information to the general public and to those at-risk groups in order to increase understanding about HTLV-3 infection and ways in which its spread can be controlled. And an additional £2.5 million was set aside for public health education, in addition to financial allocations set out on the next page. Which related to research and so on. And then the next document I'd like to go to, please, is HMTR 608_045. So we've seen that the public document, the 1985 annual report, talks about the successes and the finances that were allocated to a public health education campaign in 1985 and particularly 1986. But internally, on the 3rd of October 1986, Sir Donald Aitchison sent this letter to Sir Kenneth Stowe, who was the permanent secretary at the DHSS. Paragraph 1, if we could focus in, please. He noted that people who are infected with HIV are in many ways more important than patients with AIDS. Just pausing there, I don't think he meant in terms of their human value, but in terms of the risk of transmission. He went on, because they are usually unaware they are infected, but they are infectious in terms of sexual contacts, unborn babies, and blood for years, probably for life. We know that the incubation period can be at least 6 years. Then could we go to paragraph 2 next? He estimated that there were at least 50 cases of HIV infection for every case of AIDS, which in the UK would equate to 25,000 or more infected carriers. And if we could go next to paragraph 3, please. He noted that at least 25% of that group would develop AIDS, and said, "It is thought by some that this proportion will continue to be revised upwards as the years passed." And he warned that many experts believe that most of those people, almost all young, would eventually develop AIDS and die unless the rate of spread of infection was curtailed. He said that the social and economic cost would be calamitous. He advised, and if we could go to the second page now, please, and look at paragraphs 6 and 7. His advice was that from the medical point of view, the government's response had been inadequate and was now substantially less to educate the public than some other European countries. Perhaps there's a word missing, but what was being done was substantially less to educate the public than in some other European countries. He said, "It is increasingly difficult to defend in public. Pressure will mount as the number of cases increases." He says that he has advised ministers that from the public health point of view, the education campaign to reduce the spread of infection should take priority over all other calls on finance, and that furthermore, in view of the multiplying effect of the means of spread, it is desperately urgent that action should be taken immediately. A proper centrally coordinated programme involving all the media and together with the involvement of district health and local authorities and the voluntary sector is urgently required, and the relatively small amount of money needed should not be, underlined, spared. He said there's no time for protracted evaluations.
Can you help with what it is about the government's response thus far that Sir Donald is saying has been inadequate?
Could we go back up to the first page? So he doesn't set out there what measures have been taken. I don't think, I'm just checking. Could we go down to paragraph 4 as well? No, what he's setting out is the rates of spread and infection, but not what has been done. And so it's a little difficult to trace what it is he says is inadequate. We know what was being done from the annual report, which I just cited, and there was a public health campaign already in place at this time. But it seems, or you may infer from reading this letter, that he thought that what he was doing in terms of the public health campaign was not sufficient or big enough or well-funded enough to have the effect that he sought.
Or hadn't been previously.
Hadn't been previously. This is dated the...
This is October 86.
October 86, and the 1985 report that we went to, his introduction to that report had been signed off in July 1986. So as at July 1986, or previously and leading up to July 1986, we know that some public health education measures had been taken, and those are detailed. But we know that by October, he was saying that they weren't enough. I don't have a document that sets out any more specifically what it was that he thought was inadequate.
So it may well be a reference to the lack of, and the lack of impact of anything which had been said to the public, to inform the public previously about what the risks truly were.
That might be an inference that you could draw. Yes.
One of the issues for me is to look at what, for instance, might have been done to combat stigma, and education is the answer which has been given by some witnesses. That, of course, depends upon the quality and quantity of the information.
Yes.
And its timeliness.
Yes.
So it may be something that is relevant to that, I don't know. But if any further light can be shed on what he meant by that, I would be interested.
Well, we do have what happened next. We've got at HMTR 0000008_044. This is a letter from Sir Kenneth Stowe discussing the matter with Cabinet Secretary Sir Robert Armstrong. And you can see in the first paragraph, it says, "We discussed on Friday evening the issues that lie behind the troubled minute to me from Sir Donald Aitchison, copy at annex," that's the letter we just looked at, "and concluded it would be desirable for you to brief the Prime Minister for next weekend with advice on how you should proceed." Sir Robert Armstrong, in turn, called a meeting of permanent secretaries on the 8th of October 1986. We can see documents pertaining to that meeting at SHTM 0001041. So the first page of this document shows a note prepared in advance of the meeting on the 8th of October, and it gives the context of the meeting, referring to Sir Kenneth Stowe's letter of the 6th of October attaching Sir Donald Aitchison's minute that we've looked at, expressing a deep concern at the lack of action to prevent the spread of AIDS. And then the background is set out, that Mr. Fowler had minuted the Prime Minister about the AIDS problem in the September of the previous year, that the ministerial steering group had been set up, and then other measures as set out there. And then at the bottom of the page, it says, "However, as the CMO notes, these measures have proved insufficient to halt the spread of the disease." So what the author of this note seems to have taken from Sir Donald Aitchison's minute is that despite the measures which were being taken, the concern was the spread of infection. And so what it was that was insufficient is that despite everything that had been done, cases were still going up. Whether that is a correct reading or not of the nature of the concern as a matter for you.
Can we just go scroll up that page? Thank you. Just to put it in context. Yes, it says what measures have proved insufficient. Thank you. Yes.
And then if we could just go on to the next page, please. The author of the note identifies two major difficulties by way of obstacles to progress. They are firstly identifying measures that will have the effect of containing the disease, and secondly persuading ministers to introduce those measures which would be effective but which appear to condone behaviour normally regarded as unacceptable, which you might read as a coded reference to the issue we've discussed about being explicit about what poses a sexual risk and what doesn't. The minutes of the meeting are in this document as well. Could we go to page 4, please? So this is the beginning of the note or minute of the meeting, record of the meeting. And we can see that those present included Sir Donald Aitchison amongst the permanent secretaries who also attended. And can we go to the next page, please, page 5 of the document? At paragraph 3, we can see Sir Donald Aitchison's contribution to the meeting. He said that, so they're talking about setting up a public body to be specifically responsible for AIDS education. And that's what he's referring to when he says a standoff public authority. He notes that, given the scale of the task, the proposed Education Council would have to be headed by a steady and experienced man. He doesn't seem to consider a steady and experienced woman at that stage, but sign of the times. Capable of withstanding strong public and political pressures. He says, on the spread of the disease, we had fewer facts than we would like, and it would be wrong at this stage to be over-alarmist. So you may compare the language used in the minute and the words expressed, or at least recorded to be expressed in this note of the meeting, where he is saying it would be wrong to be over-alarmist. He says that they know that the virus is spreading very fast among the drug addict and homosexual population and their sexual partners and their sexual partners' babies. But he says at this stage, however, the spread to the population at large was relatively slow, and notes that of 2.14 million blood donations by 1.5 million donors in the most recent period, only 50 had proved HIV positive. He said that there was not enough evidence to explain why the disease was spreading much more rapidly in Africa, and that there was a difficult balance to be drawn between complacency and overreaction. So that perhaps more balanced or looking at both sides of the question approach is notable in the meeting, whereas the urgency that was conveyed in his minute, which prompted the meeting, perhaps was more on one side of the issue. He was successful, we know, in obtaining more funding for the public education campaign that he sought. And we can see that in the 1986 annual report, which is at DHSC 0007008. We can see it's on the state of public health for the year 1986. This report was published the following year, and Sir Donald Aitchison's introduction for that report was dated September 1987. And if we could go, please, to page 10. This is part of the introduction to the report. And we can see from the third paragraph down, it said that in the absence of an effective vaccine or treatment, the principal means of reducing the spread of HIV is to educate the public how the virus is transmitted and how to protect themselves and others. That's strikingly similar to what had been said in some internal documents about the importance of public education. It says the public information campaign, which began in 1986, has continued to gather momentum and has attracted much international interest. In the first 2 weeks of January 1987, an AIDS leaflet was delivered to every household in the country. This was accompanied by television and cinema advertising. The broadcasting authorities gave additional airtime to AIDS advertising on all channels by broadcasting 19 hours of television programmes in an AIDS television week. And in the same month, a 2-tier free telephone campaign and information and advice service was established. And it goes on to discuss that advice service. Then at page 65, please, of the report. So this is within the communicable diseases chapter in the subsection on AIDS. there's further information about the public education campaign under measures taken to prevent the spread of HIV infection. And it's explained that a campaign was launched in March of 1986 and goes on to give details. And then we can see that so I'm now about halfway down the big paragraph in the middle of the page. It says, in November 1986, the campaign was greatly widened and intensified. Newspaper advertising was increased, and a campaign aimed at young people was started through magazine, cinema, and radio advertisements. So it does seem that the concerns flagged resulted in a boost to what had previously been the public education campaign, and more resource was put in late 1986. A Dear Doctor letter was sent to complement this acceleration of the public health campaign, and that is at OXUH 0002238_007. And it was sent on the 2nd of December 1986. It says that the letter has two objectives: to inform the doctors receiving it. You can see at the top of the screen, it's all doctors in England. To inform them about the latest phase of the public education campaign, which emphasised the increasing risk of infection with HIV as a result of vaginal intercourse and is likely to stimulate a number of patients to turn to you for advice. So it's a bit clearer about what it is that causes a risk. And B, to explain the current AIDS situation in the UK and give further information and advice which may be offered to those who think they have been at risk. And then it goes on to outline the measures that we've also just seen in the annual report, in terms of the modes of communication that were used in that campaign, including sending a leaflet to all households. If we could just flip to page 4 of that document and look under the subheading National Blood Transfusion Service. So at the same time as raising awareness of the risks, the letter does also talk about misconceptions and emphasises that there's no risk in donating blood, and goes on to say that within the UK, all blood donations have been screened for HIV antibodies since the 14th of October 1985. We can see that the leaflet referred to that was sent to every household, it's at MRC.
Just before we go there, can we just look at the chronology which is set out in the document you've just taken me to? Because it talks about the campaign being launched in 1986. This is the media campaign, the making available of time on TV. And November 1986 widened and intensified. But the campaign's launched in March 86 and had the features which I mentioned. What you took me to earlier was October 86, where the CMO appeared to think that even that response had inadequacy about it.
So the widening of the campaign took place in the November of 1986, and we're now looking at December 1986, and they're preparing for the leaflet drop to all households, which took place in the January of 1987.
So that's the big change.
Yes, so there was, you're quite right, the measures were already commenced from round about the March of 1986, and they'd been in the pipeline since June of 1985. That's where the genesis of the idea came from that we traced through. And the public explanation of that campaign in the 1985 annual report, which was published in 1996, was quite positive. But in the October of 1986, we saw the deep concern being raised in the minute that was circulated internally and discussed by Kenneth Stowe and the permanent secretaries. And a month after that, there was a boost to the campaign. It was widened, more channels of communication were used. The Dear Doctor letter then went out in the December. And what we're just about to come to is the leaflet that went to all households in the January of 1987.
Thank you.
So that is at MRCO 0000 554 _ 005. And this is the leaflet that went to all households. We can see at the bottom of the page it says Government Information 1987. It's quite hard-hitting. Probably people will be familiar with the slogan, AIDS don't die of ignorance. And if we just look at the next page to give a flavour, why are you being sent this leaflet? This leaflet is being sent to every household in the country. And it talks about matters of health and sex. And if we go to the next page, when asked how do you become infected, it explains because the virus can be present in semen and vaginal fluid, and talks about the danger of sexual intercourse, vaginal or anal sex. So at this point, Norman Fowler and Donald Aitchison have won the argument about using clearer terminology in public health information. And we're looking at the details of a leaflet, which might be thought to be too forensic for a presentation about the chief medical officer who was responsible for policy advice. But in fact, we know from Lord Fowler, as evidence, he told the inquiry that every advertisement in this campaign was approved personally by himself and the chief medical officer. So his evidence is that Sir Donald Aitchison looked at each of the adverts that went out, including this leaflet, and approved them. The next topic in the written presentation is the introduction of heat treatment. I don't propose to go in detail through that topic or the documents pertaining to that topic. They're dealt with at paragraphs 153 to 162 of the written presentation for those who want to look. What those documents show is that the Chief Medical Officer kept abreast of the developments in relation to heat-treated factor 8. And there's just one document that I will pick up on, which is at DHSC 0000514. We can see that on the 30th of July 1985, Sir Donald Aitchison wrote to the Secretary of State, who is Sir Norman Fowler, about AIDS and the treatment of haemophiliacs. He says, following their recent conversation, he's checked on the position regarding the treatment of haemophiliacs with factor 8, and he's been advised that all factor 8 produced at the Blood Products Laboratory has been heat-treated since April 1985. He talks about the importance of avoiding using any commercial unheat-treated factor 8, which may remain from 1984. And then in the final paragraph says he's satisfied that it's extremely unlikely that any patients with haemophilia treated in the UK will in future be infected with HTLV3 virus. And then it's quite interesting to see that he added a personal manuscript edition. We know it's him because in Norman Fowler's evidence, he says this was a manuscript edition from Sir Donald Aitchison. He says, but sadly, a very high proportion of the haemophilic population already are infected due to previous use of non-heat-treated factor 8. So that was his personal reflection at that time. The next topic I will deal with similarly by reference to the written presentation, and that's the topic of consent to testing. Paragraphs 163 to 172 of the written presentation deal with the theme of consent to testing and anonymised testing. And the documents show that Sir Donald Aitchison sought advice and ultimately considered that this was an issue for ministers to decide. But I won't take us through the documents now. I will pick up on a few documents relating to Sir Donald Aitchison's views on compensation for HIV infection. The inquiry has heard considerable evidence about the litigation brought between 1988 and 1991 by people with haemophilia who had been infected with HIV as a result of the use of blood products. Sir Donald Aitchison met with the Minister of State for Health to discuss that litigation on the 30th of August 1989, but otherwise he doesn't appear to have been heavily personally involved in the government's response to that litigation. However, there is one letter he wrote, which we'll go to, which is at HSOC 001 7025 _ 004. We can see that this is a letter from the Chief Medical Officer to the Secretary of State, who was by then Sir Kenneth Clarke, dated the 20th of July 1980. And if we could just zoom in on the paragraph. He said that he hoped that the Secretary of State would
1980 or?
Sorry, 1990.
Oh, thank you. It was wrongly put down in the transcript.
20th of July 1990.
Thank
you. Referring to the AIDS litigation, he was commenting on an intervention of the trial judge, Mr. Justice Ugnall, who had urged all sides to consider a compromise. And Sir Donald wrote, "I hope the Secretary of State will take account of my view that the problem of HIV infection in haemophiliacs can in fact be regarded as a unique catastrophe. The key feature, which is not brought out particularly well in the memorandum of the Directors of Public Health, is that HIV infection, in addition to almost inevitably causing a very unpleasant progressive illness and death, results in a substantial proportion of cases of infection of the female sexual partner and also, on average, 1/4 of the subsequently conceived children. In both wife and children, the infection will also prove fatal. In the case of the children, fatality takes place in infancy. The only remedy which will certainly prevent the transmission by sexual contact is the invariable use of a condom throughout the partnership. Unlike the position in hepatitis B, which can occur as the result of a therapeutic accident, there is no vaccination available to protect the sexual partner. Furthermore, in hepatitis B, the outcome is only rarely fatal and infectiveness is present in a small minority of cases." And then if we could go to page 2, please. He goes on to summarise the particular aspects of infection with HIV and says that the tragedy goes beyond anything which has ever been described as a result of a therapeutic accident and is very likely indeed never to occur again. And then what he is requesting in this letter, he says in the final paragraph, "I hope therefore that for humanitarian reasons the government will find some way to make an ex gratia settlement to the infected haemophiliacs in relation to this unique tragedy. I cannot personally see how this could be regarded as implying any responsibility for other accidents such as benzodiazepine-dependent cerebral palsy following obstetric misadventure, etc." So that was his request to Secretary of State. We've got one more letter in relation to possible settlement, which is at DHSC 0004365_015. This is a letter of the 5th of December 1990, which Dr. Hilary Pickles wrote to the CMO. As I mentioned earlier, Dr. Hilary Pickles worked in DHSS in the AIDS unit, and she wrote to express her concern. She says she spoke to him that morning about his concern at the possible implications of one of the options being considered for our Secretary of State to use in tomorrow's discussion with the Chief Secretary. And she said that this presents the best arguments for encouraging Treasury to cover settlement costs and could be used for ring-fencing this deal. It may be very difficult to present this line of argument in a way which does not damage the reputation of the professionals concerned. If there is said to be a risk of losing which is sufficient to justify a settlement, then either the case is weak because there was negligence or the judge and legal system is biased, yet neither of these reasons are ones we could or should use. When asked about this letter in her oral evidence, Dr. Pickles said that it was very unusual for her to write to a chief medical officer in this format. And she said it was obvious that she'd had a discussion with him, and he said put that in writing so he could then put on the record that he felt there'd been no negligence. So we only have the letter to him, and we don't have any reply from him, but we do have her evidence that he had asked her to put that in writing. So we have on the one hand a letter asking for a settlement to be favourably considered by the Secretary of State, and then we have Dr. Pickles' evidence that to some extent he supported her concern that shouldn't result in any implication of negligence or damage to the reputation of clinicians. And then there's a related, although slightly different issue, where we have documents showing Sir Donald Acheson's view on compensation. Can we go, please, to DHSC 0004365_015? Oh, is that a wrong? Let me see. We'll go first then, I think, to DHSC 0002862_006. And what this is a communication setting out Sir Donald Acheson's view on a minute, which I will find the reference to and take us to next, if I can. But for context, the issue was whether to extend financial support to people who did not have haemophilia, but who had been infected with HIV through the use of blood and, in rare cases, blood products. And he says that he's seen the minute about that issue and about the costs that would be incurred if the compensation scheme for haemophiliacs were to be extended. He has commented that he thinks that the only tenable argument of differentiation from haemophilia of any weight is in paragraph 3 of Annex A, and if I can, I'll take you there momentarily. He said that the number of cases arising from other types of tissue transplanting, e.g. organ transplants and sperm, would be unlikely to go beyond the fingers of both hands maximum. CMO would be concerned with spread to hepatitis cases of various sorts. So he's there expressing some dubiousness about arguments being made to refuse the extension of compensation to victims of infected blood who did not have haemophilia, but at the same time noting a concern with spread to hepatitis cases of various sorts. So he's not enthusiastically campaigning for widespread compensation by any means. And then could we go please to DHSC 0003560_051. Yes, this is the document with a note on the present position on compensation for people infected with HIV through blood transfusion and the costs which would be incurred if we were to extend to them a compensation scheme for haemophiliacs. And if we go to Annex A, please, which should be at page 2. And then go through to page 4. And look at paragraph 3. So this is paragraph 3 of Annex A, the only argument which Sir Donald Aitchison thought might tenably hold any weight, was a distinction between haemophiliacs and those without haemophilia who were victims of infected blood, because haemophiliacs were doubly disadvantaged by the pre-existing haemophilia which affected their employment, mortgage and insurance prospects, and by their HIV infection, and because the hereditary nature of haemophilia can mean that more than one member of the family might be infected. So he was there to an extent supporting an argument for a distinction in disadvantage. But I think that's as far as I can probably take it from the limited response that we have from him. So those are the documents chronologically that I wanted to take you to. I mentioned that I would come back towards the end of the presentation to 2 particular categories of documents. And the first was what's referred to as Dear Doctor letters. So one of the functions of the Chief Medical Officer, as we've heard, is public guidance on health issues, and one means he had of disseminating advice and guidance was in letters to the medical profession, but we've seen in his witness statement to the BSE inquiry that he considered himself first among equals, and that it wasn't his place to be directive. And we looked at the first letter that was sent out about AIDS in the May of 1985, which took a fairly polite and humble tone in encouraging doctors to accept his advice if it were to be helpful. Just a note on frequency, set out at paragraph 31 of the written presentation are all of the Dear Doctor letters pertaining to infected blood issues in the 1980s, which the inquiry has so far identified. Sir Henry Yellowlees sent 3 on the topic of hepatitis B in the period from 1981 to 1984. Sir Donald Aitchison sent 9 on the topic of AIDS between 1985 and 1990. So there was an increase in frequency of Dear Doctor letters on infected blood topics. That doesn't mean to say there was necessarily an increase of Dear Doctor letters in all, because we haven't examined the letters which went on other issues. We've looked at 2 letters so far. One was on the introduction of HIV testing in general facilities, and one was on the public education campaign in the December of 1986. And I'm just going to pick up on two more. Sorry, we've looked at three so far. One was the initial information on AIDS. The second was on the introduction of general testing. And the third was on public education. And I'm going to pick up on two more. The first I want to pick up on is at DHSC 0000177. And could we go to page 2, please? So you'll recall that we looked at a document showing the publicity round that Sir Donald Aitchison engaged in on the 1st of October 1985 when HTLV3 testing was introduced in blood transfusion centres. And it referred to a Dear Doctor letter of the same date. This is that letter. He refers back to his letter of the 15th of May with the general information for doctors about AIDS. He also refers back to the information he previously circulated about alternative facilities for providing antibody tests at sexual health clinics and through GPs. And just below the A and B, we can see he says that the synchronous provision of these arrangements is to ensure that people who believe themselves at risk of infection do not donate blood in order to be tested. This is crucial because even a reliable test cannot detect very early infections to which an antibody response has not yet been generated, and goes on to talk about arrangements for counselling those people. Now this, again, relates back to the concern flagged in internal briefings about the possibility of creating an incentive for people from high-risk groups to donate blood in order to get tested, and that being a factor in the way that testing was rolled out. He goes on to say that it's essential that all individuals who are found to have positive tests receive counselling. And then over the page, he talks about counselling services, training services for counsellors, and concludes by saying the antibody test is an important tool in the control of the spread of HTLV3 infection. If it is to be used effectively, very strict confidentiality must be maintained in respect of positive results. And you may reflect on the tone of this letter when compared to the very first letter he sent out to doctors regarding AIDS. It is, or it could be inferred to be more directive and more urgent in the way he sets out what must be done, rather than saying, here is some information for your benefit should you choose to look at it. And then there's just one more Dear Doctor letter that it would be interesting to go to. It's at BART 0000728. And this is on the 14th of January 1986. So this follows on from the Dear Doctor letter that we saw in December. No, it doesn't. I'm sorry. There will be a letter in December of 1986. I've got my chronology confused. This is a standalone letter of the 14th of January 1986 entitled Children at School and Problems Related to AIDS. And it mentions that the previous autumn, so in autumn 1985, following publicity about a school child who was found to be infected with HTLV3, the government undertook to issue guidance on AIDS as it affects schools. And the letter appends an information booklet on that topic. If we look at the third paragraph on the page, please, he says that doctors have an important role to play in achieving approved health education on the HTLV3 infection. Members of the general public who have worries about AIDS and those who are directly involved with infected people need to be told about the nature of the HTLV3 infection and be reassured about the limited ways it can spread. So when you're thinking about stigma and combating stigma, I've also referred earlier in this presentation to occasions in which it might be inferred that it was part of the CMO's role to address misinformation as well as promote information. This letter is quite interesting because it's really geared at the stigma that might be experienced particularly by children in schools. The other category of document, which it would be interesting to look at, is that of the annual reports, which we have come to bit by bit as they are relevant to the other themes that we have looked at. They are set out from paragraph 45 onwards of the written presentation. And what's interesting at looking at them collectively in relation to the risk of AIDS is to see how the space devoted to the topic and the prominence in which that information is placed develops throughout the 1980s. So we looked at the 1983 annual report. If we put it back up on screen, it's DHSC 000704. And if we could go please to page 61. This was the part so that you took us to in the communicable diseases section on Kaposi's sarcoma and AIDS, noting the reporting to the CDSC. So approximately half a page there, and then the brief section that we looked at, it was at page 70, please. Just the paragraph that goes over to the top of the next page, noting the appearance of this new and frequently fatal syndrome, and saying merely that the cause was unknown. The next year, the 1984 annual report is at DHSC 007005. This was the year that we looked at that Sir Donald Aitchison signed off the report but acknowledged that the work had been done during the year of Sir Henry Yellowlees' tenure. And at page 54, please. We can see that there is a one-page section on AIDS. It just goes on to the next page as well. And it notes the number of cases in the USA and the steps taken in the UK, and then just over to the next page. UK research and the establishment of the MRC AIDS Working Party. And then at page 66, please. In the sexually transmitted diseases section, there's a further 2 paragraphs giving the statistics, noting that in the USA, at that point, there had been a cumulative total of 3,000 cases to the end of 1983, with a mortality rate of 43%. Noting the surveillance of AIDS in the UK by CDSC, to the end of 1983 there had been 31 cases and 16 of them had died. 16 of those patients, had died. And that the cause remained unknown, but this year it says it is likely to be a viral agent transmitted by sexual contact, transfusion of blood and certain blood products. The incubation period can be as long as 3 years or more. So the difference between the 1982 report and the 1983 report, bearing in mind they're each published the subsequent year, is that the cause is set out in the 1983 report, whereas in the 1982 report it was just said to be unknown. Then in 1984, it's at DHSC 0007006, please. This annual report was published in 1986. The introduction by Sir Donald Aitchison was dated the October of 1985. For the first time in this report, AIDS is featured in the introduction to the report. So could we go, please, to page 8? We can see there that under the public health section of the introduction, it's noted that there has been a major step forward in identifying the cause or agent, that there had been an increase in the number of cases, and a reference to the need for the control of the spread of the infection to be regarded as an issue of prime importance to the future of the nation. So by the time Sir Donald Aitchison signed off on this introduction in October 1985, it postdates what he said in his autobiography to have been the realisation of the gravity of the issue in early 1985. And in his annual report that was published subsequent to that realisation, he is saying in a public document that the need for the control of the spread of infection was to be regarded as an issue of prime importance to the future of the nation. There's also a much longer section in this report in the communicable diseases chapter. That's at page 41, please. And it's the bottom 2 paragraphs in that page. And we'll look here before going on to the next couple of pages. So in the 1984 report, it's noted that 77 cases of AIDS had been reported in the UK between the 1st of January and the 31st of December. That was on top of a previous 31 cases reported up to the end of 1983. And that by the end of 1984, 108 cases had been reported to the CDSC. There had been 3 cases in people with haemophilia, and notes a number of patients with Kaposi's sarcoma, pneumocystic carinae pneumonia, and other opportunistic infections. So if we could go over to the next page, please. From this report onwards, there are fairly detailed statistics provided in relation to various aspects of the disease. So here we're looking at presentations, and if we could scroll down, please. There's a section on transmission by blood and blood products in the UK. And it's noted that 3 recipients were known to have become antibody positive following blood donations from one donor who subsequently developed AIDS, and that the plasma from one of his donations also contaminated a batch of factor 8. During 1984, there were no cases of AIDS arising from this or other blood transfusions, but 3 haemophiliacs had developed AIDS and 2 had died after receiving imported commercial factor VIII. And then the next section is measures taken to control the spread of AIDS, and this really picks up on some of the chronology that we've already looked at. There's the establishment of EGA, and then on the next page, leaflets and guidance provided by the Advisory Committee on Dangerous Pathogens and the Health Education Council, and the introduction of, or the work done on the introduction of screening, and the use of the AIDS and blood donors leaflet in transfusion centres, work done on heat treatment, and the work towards self-sufficiency, so outlining the various limbs or measures that were at that point being worked on to address the spread of AIDS. There's a section on international collaboration, and then over on the next page, please. Oh no, that's the end. So it's 2.5 pages in communicable diseases, and then there's another section under sexually transmitted diseases, or the sexually transmitted diseases chapter, which is at page 56. And it's a brief paragraph, but it sets out there the statistics. And notes the uncertainty about how many people who are infected with HTLV will develop AIDS. It says at that point it seems certain to be at least 10%. When it says AIDS is discussed in more detail, that's the section that we just looked at. The 1985 annual report is at DHSC 007007. This report was published the following year, and Sir Donald Aitchison's introduction is dated July of 1986. This report again featured a section on AIDS in the introduction, which is at page 12. If we just focus, please, under communicable diseases at the bottom, it's noted that the spread of HTLV3 within the population of the UK and throughout the world provides one of the greatest challenges in communicable disease control in this century. So the emphasis and tone in this report, as in the previous year's report, is really focused on the gravity of the issue and is consistent with Sir Donald Aitchison's autobiography and what he says about the prominence and priority which he accorded to AIDS. Goes on to say that the key feature which makes control of spread difficult is that infection is usually transmitted by sexual intercourse with persons who are often unaware that they are carrying the virus, and notes that there is a latent period of up to 5 years between the date of infection and the development of the illness, but also says that not all carriers of antibodies develop the syndrome. And then at the bottom of the page it says, in the absence of any antiviral drug or effective vaccine, we have limited means at our disposal. The 3 most important means to control the virus are, first, informing the public on how the infection is and is not spread. Second, providing a safe supply of blood. And third, advising infected persons on how they might avoid infecting others. And then it goes on to say public education is essential. Programs should be aimed at the general public as well as persons actually at, or possibly at risk, and that it is essential that everyone receives accurate information and that myths are exposed. So that's consistent with Sir Donald Aitchison's preoccupation during 1986 with the need for effective and efficient public health information on AIDS. It goes on to note testing and guidelines being introduced. So that was just the introduction. There's then 7 pages on AIDS under the Communicable Diseases chapter, which is at page 49. I won't go through all 7 pages, but it can be seen that the statistics provided were broken down in a fairly detailed manner. So they include, if we go down please, under characteristics of AIDS patients, numbers of people who are recipients of blood who have contracted AIDS. And if we scroll out again, please. And back out, please. And then to the next page, please. The control methods are then set out in a great deal more detail, but it's the similar information that we saw in the introduction as expanded in the chapter. Would that be a convenient moment to take an afternoon break? I'm aware that we've got a few more annual reports to go, but we won't take all of this afternoon's allocated time.
Yes, we'll take a break now in that case until 20 to 4.
Thank you, sir.
20 to 4.